I clawed my way out of my own grave on a night when the moon hung low and indifferent, and the earth that had swallowed me whole seemed to spit me back into a world that no longer remembered my name. They say the dead do not return, but I am proof that some burials are merely beginnings. My name is Rosalind Blackwood, though for 2 years I wore no name at all, only rags and confusion and the hollow ache of something precious lost. I was the Countess of Ravenmoor, wife to Edmund Blackwood, mother to a boy named Henry, whose laughter once filled the corridors of our great house like sunlight through stained glass. I was 23 years old when I died. I was 23 years old when I woke in darkness, with soil in my mouth and the weight of the world pressing down upon my chest. Before I tell you how I returned from the grave, let me tell you how I came to be in one. I was born Rosalind Whitmore, the second daughter of a country parson in the rolling hills of Devonshire. We were not wealthy, but we were happy, surrounded by books and music and the gentle rhythms of village life. My father taught me Latin and Greek, subjects considered unsuitable for a woman, but he believed that God had given minds to all his children and expected them to be used. My mother taught me embroidery and piano, watercolors, and the proper management of a household. Between them, I was raised to be both ornamental and useful, a combination that would serve me well in the years to come. I met Edmund Blackwood at a summer ball when I was 19 years old. He was 6 years my senior, recently come into his title after his father's death, and already acquiring a reputation for seriousness that bordered on severity. The young ladies of the county whispered about him behind their fans, so handsome but so cold, so wealthy but so withdrawn. He attended social functions with the air of a man fulfilling an unpleasant obligation, and he rarely danced, rarely smiled, rarely engaged in the frivolous conversation that was the currency of such gatherings. I should not have caught his attention. I was nobody, the daughter of a parson, wearing a gown my sister had worn before me, too nervous to do more than hover at the edges of the room and wish I were home with a book. But something drew him to me that night. Perhaps it was that I was not trying to catch his eye, not angling for his attention as so many others were. Perhaps it was the way I stood apart from the crowd, an island of stillness in a sea of motion. He asked me to dance, and I was so startled that I nearly refused. But my mother had taught me manners, and so I placed my hand in his and let him lead me onto the floor, and the rest of my life began. He was not cold at all, I discovered, once you broke through the reserve. He was shy, painfully so, and had learned to disguise it with formality. He had been hurt by fortune hunters and social climbers, and he had built walls to protect himself from further disappointment. But with me, those walls came down. He laughed at my jokes and listened to my opinions and looked at me as though I were the most fascinating creature he had ever encountered. We were married 6 months later, in the little church where my father preached. It was not a grand wedding, not the kind befitting an earl, but Edmund insisted that it was what he wanted. Only family, only friends, only those who loved us. And afterward, he carried me over the threshold of Ravenmoor Hall and into a life I had never dared to imagine. The first years were golden. I threw myself into my role as countess, learning the management of the estate, the names and needs of the tenants, the complex social obligations that came with rank. I redecorated the gloomy old house, filling it with flowers and light, opening curtains that had been closed for years, airing out rooms that had been sealed since Edmund's mother's death. I hosted dinners and garden parties and charitable fêtes. I made Ravenmoor a place of warmth and welcome, and Edmund bloomed under my care, shedding his severity like a snake sheds its skin. And then Henry came. The pregnancy was difficult, the birth more so. There were hours when the midwife feared she would lose us both, and Edmund paced outside the door, his face white with terror. But I survived, and Henry survived, and when I held him in my arms for the first time, I understood that everything I had done before, everything I had been, was merely preparation for this moment. He was perfect. Dark hair like his father, gray eyes like mine, a tiny rosebud mouth that sought my breast with desperate hunger. I loved him with a ferocity that frightened me, a love so vast it seemed to fill every corner of my being. I would have died for him without hesitation. I would have killed for him without remorse. In the end, I nearly did die for him. Not in any noble way, but in the most mundane. A fever that struck from nowhere, a doctor who could not be trusted, a grave that should have been my end. But I am getting ahead of myself. The trouble began, I think, about a year before I fell ill, though I did not recognize it at the time. Edmund had always been careful with money, mindful of his responsibilities to the estate and its dependents. But suddenly, there were whispers of debt, of mortgages, of investments gone wrong. He spent hours in his study, poring over ledgers, his face drawn and worried. When I asked him what was wrong, he dismissed my concerns, said it was nothing, said he would handle it. I should have pressed harder. I should have insisted on knowing the truth. But I was busy with Henry, with the house, with the 1,000 small demands of my daily life. I trusted Edmund to manage our finances as I trusted him in all things, and I let the matter drop. Then came the letters. I found the first one by accident, a sheet of cream-colored paper that had slipped behind the cushions of the settee in the morning room. It was addressed to Edmund, written in an elegant feminine hand that I did not recognize. I should not have read it. A wife has a right to her husband's secrets, my mother always said, and a duty not to look for them. But something compelled me to unfold the paper, to scan the words written there. "My dearest Edmund," it began, and my heart went cold. The letter spoke of old affection, of shared memories, of a connection that had never truly faded. It mentioned financial assistance, discreet arrangements, meetings that I had not known about. And it was signed with a single letter, M. I confronted Edmund that night. He was tired, distracted, not in the mood for accusations. He told me the letter was nothing, that M was an old friend, that I was imagining things. He told me he loved me, only me, that there was no one else. And I wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that I let myself be convinced. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew in the dark. I began to notice things I had overlooked before. The way Edmund sometimes stared into the fire, lost in thoughts he would not share. The way he started at unexpected sounds, as though bracing for news he dreaded. The way he looked at me sometimes, with an expression I could not read, something between love and guilt and a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. And then the fever came, and everything else ceased to matter. I do not remember falling ill. One day I was well, playing with Henry in the garden, laughing at his attempts to catch butterflies. The next I was burning, my skin on fire, my head splitting with pain. The local doctor was summoned, but he could do nothing. He said it was a fever of unknown origin, that it would have to run its course. Edmund was frantic. He sent for specialists from London, offered any sum for a cure. And on the third day, a man arrived who claimed he could save me, Dr. Julian Fairfax. He was tall and thin, with cold gray eyes and hands that never seemed to warm. He came recommended by an acquaintance of Edmund's, he said, a lady who spoke highly of his skills. He took over my care immediately, dismissing the local doctor, preparing medicines that no one else was allowed to touch. He assured Edmund that I would recover, that his treatment was proven, that there was nothing to fear. I remember very little of the days that followed. Fragments of fever dreams, faces swimming above me, voices speaking words I could not understand. I remember Edmund holding my hand, his tears falling on my skin. I remember Henry's voice, high and frightened, asking if Mama was going to die. I remember the bitter taste of medicine on my tongue, and then nothing at all, until I woke in darkness. I do not know how long I lay there before instinct overtook terror. Minutes, perhaps, hours. Time had abandoned me as surely as breath had, and yet breath returned, shallow and desperate, burning through lungs that should have been still. My fingers moved first, twitching against rough wood, and then my hands, palms scraping against the lid of something I could not see but understood with the primal knowledge of prey caught in a snare. A coffin. I was in a coffin. And the coffin was in the ground. The scream that tore from my throat was swallowed by the earth. No one heard. No one came. I was alone with the hammering of my own heart and the impossible truth that I was alive where no living thing should be. I do not remember deciding to fight. I only remember fighting. My nails split against the wood, my knuckles bloodied. The lid above me was not fine mahogany, not the polished casket of a countess, but something cheaper, rougher, hastily constructed. That detail would haunt me later when I had the luxury of thought. In that moment, there was only the desperate need to escape, to claw through splinters and soil and whatever lay between me and the sky. The wood gave way in pieces. Dirt poured in, filling my nose, my eyes, my gasping mouth. I pushed upward with strength I did not know I possessed, driven by something beyond will, beyond reason. My hands broke through first, fingers grasping at cold air, and then I pulled myself up through the earth like a creature being born, emerging into a night that smelled of rain and rotting leaves and the distant sweetness of wood smoke. I lay on the ground for a long time, coughing dirt, weeping without sound. Above me, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the woman who had just torn herself free from death's embrace. I was in a clearing I did not recognize, surrounded by trees whose shapes were strange to me. No headstone marked the place where I had been buried, no flowers, no monument. Just a shallow mound of disturbed earth in a forgotten corner of what might have been forest, or might have been the wild edges of an estate grown over with neglect. I tried to remember how I had come to be there, but my mind was a shattered mirror, reflecting only fragments. I remembered fever. I remembered Edmund's face, pale and drawn, hovering above me. I remembered the taste of something bitter on my tongue, medicine perhaps, and then darkness. Darkness that stretched on until it became the inside of a coffin, until it became earth, until it became this. I did not know where I was. I did not know how long I had been buried. I knew only that I was alive, impossibly alive, and that somewhere in the world there was a house called Ravenmoor and a child called Henry and a man I had once loved with every fiber of my being. I walked. The first step was the hardest. My body had forgotten how to move, muscles atrophied by whatever strange sleep had held me, bones aching as though they had been frozen and only now began to thaw. I stumbled through the darkness, falling often, rising again, driven by an instinct deeper than thought. The trees around me were shadows within shadows, their branches reaching toward me like grasping fingers, and the wind that moved through them sounded almost like voices, almost like whispers, almost like my name. I do not know how many days passed before I found a road. Time had become strange, elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made no sense. I slept in hollows and under hedgerows, waking with no memory of having closed my eyes. I drank from streams that appeared before me as if by magic, ate berries and roots that I somehow knew were safe. My feet were bare, torn by stones and brambles, leaving bloody prints on the ground behind me. The gown I wore, white once, the gown I had been buried in, was now the color of grave dirt, stained and tattered beyond recognition. I must have looked like a ghost, like a madwoman, like something crawled up from hell. The first travelers who saw me crossed themselves and hurried past, their horses shying away as though from a serpent. The second threw coins at my feet without meeting my eyes, muttering prayers under their breath. A group of children gathered at the edge of a field to stare at me, and when I tried to approach them, they screamed and fled. I was a monster now, a thing to be feared and avoided. The woman I had been, the countess, the wife, the mother, she was gone, buried in that shallow grave, and what remained was something not quite human, something that belonged to the spaces between life and death. The third person I encountered, An old woman with a cart full of turnips stopped long enough to give me water and a crust of bread. Her face was weathered and kind, lined with a lifetime of hard labor, and she looked at me not with fear, but with pity. "Where am I?" I asked her, and my voice came out as a croak. A rusted thing, unused to speech. The words scraped my throat like broken glass. She told me I was 5 miles from a village whose name meant nothing to me, in a county I did not recognize. When I asked about Ravenmoor, about the Blackwood estate, she squinted at me as though I had spoken in tongues. "You mean the Earl's land," she said. "That's 30 miles north, past the moors. Dark place, that. They say the Countess died there 2 winters back. Terrible tragedy. Young thing she was. Left a little boy behind. 2 winters, 2 years. I had been dead for 2 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. 2 years. Henry had been 5 when I fell ill. He would be 7 now. 7 years old, without a mother, believing me dead and buried. Had he wept at my funeral? Had he asked where I had gone? Had anyone explained to him that Mama was never coming back? I thanked the old woman with words that felt like stones in my mouth and walked north. The journey took weeks, perhaps longer. I lost count of days, sleeping in barns when farmers would allow it, in ditches when they would not. I ate what I could find or what was given to me by those who took pity on the ragged woman wandering the roads. Some gave me bread and cheese, averting their eyes from my torn gown and bleeding feet. Others gave me coins, which I used to buy food at markets, where the vendors looked at me as though I were a wild animal that had wandered in from the forest. A few gave me nothing but curses and threats, driving me away with sticks and stones. I did not tell anyone who I was. I did not know if I could trust my own memories, so fractured and strange had they become. There were gaps in my mind, black spaces where thoughts should have been. I could not remember my parents' faces, though I knew I had parents. I could not remember my wedding day, though I knew I had been married. The only images that remained clear were those of Edmund and Henry. Edmund's smile when he looked at me across the breakfast table, Henry's laughter as he ran through the garden, the weight of my son in my arms, the warmth of my husband's hand in mine. I clung to those memories like a drowning woman clings to wreckage. They were all I had. They were all that proved I had ever been anyone at all. I only knew that I had to reach Ravenmoor. I had to see Henry. I had to understand. The journey took weeks, perhaps longer. I lost count of days, sleeping in barns when farmers would allow it, in ditches when they would not. I ate what I could find or what was given to me by those who took pity on the ragged woman wandering the roads. I did not tell anyone who I was. I did not know if I could trust my own memories, so fractured and strange had they become. I only knew that I had to reach Ravenmoor. I had to see Henry. I had to understand. There were stretches of that journey I do not remember at all. I would find myself in places with no recollection of how I had arrived, my feet moving of their own accord, my mind elsewhere, lost in fragments of the past. I remembered my wedding day, the weight of orange blossoms in my hair, Edmund's hands trembling as he slipped the ring onto my finger. I remembered the first time I held Henry, moments after his birth, his tiny fingers curling around mine with a grip that seemed to contain all the hope in the world. I remembered laughter in the garden, Edmund chasing Henry through the roses while I watched from the terrace, my heart so full I thought it might burst. But I also remembered darker things. The way Edmund had grown distant in the months before my illness, the letters he burned without reading aloud, the arguments I overheard through closed doors, his voice sharp, another voice answering, feminine and cold. I remembered the doctor who came to see me when the fever began. A man I had never met before, his hands too rough, his eyes too knowing. I remembered Edmund standing in the doorway, watching, and the expression on his face that I could not read, something between grief and guilt and a terrible resignation. Had he known? Had he been part of it? The thought was a blade in my chest, but I could not dismiss it. Someone had buried me alive in an unmarked grave far from consecrated ground. Someone had dressed my burial in haste and secrecy. Someone had wanted me not just dead, but forgotten. And Edmund had let it happen. I reached Ravenmoor on an evening in late autumn, when the trees had shed their leaves and the moors stretched brown and desolate beneath a sky the color of bruises. I knew the land before I saw the house, recognized the way the hills rolled and dipped, the particular slant of light through the clouds, the smell of peat and heather carried on the wind. This was home, or had been once. Now it felt like approaching the lair of something that might devour me whole. The house rose from the moors like a creature of stone and shadow, its towers black against the fading light. I had forgotten how large it was, how imposing, how the windows seemed to watch like eyes. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Lamps glowed behind glass. Life continued within those walls. Life that had learned to exist without me. I approached the gates with my heart in my throat. The gatekeeper, a man I did not recognize, looked at me with undisguised disgust. "Move along," he said. "No beggars here." "I am not a beggar," I told him. "I am Rosalind Blackwood. I am the Countess of Ravenmoor." He laughed, a cruel sound. "The Countess is dead," he said. 2 years dead and buried in the family plot. I'll not have mad women making claims at my gates. Move along, or I'll set the dogs on you." I did not move. I could not. Behind him, through the iron bars, I could see the drive leading up to the house, the fountain in the courtyard, the steps where I had once stood in silk and pearls to greet guests. All of it impossibly close and impossibly far. "Please," I said. "If you will not let me in, then send word to the Earl. Tell him that his wife stands at the gate. Tell him that I did not die." The gatekeeper's face twisted with something between pity and contempt. He reached for the bell that would summon others, and I thought he meant to have me dragged away. But before he could ring it, I heard a sound that stopped my heart. A child's voice, high and clear, calling from somewhere beyond the gates. "Papa! Papa! Come quickly!" And then I saw him. Henry. He was taller than I remembered, his baby softness given way to the lean lines of a boy who had grown without me. His hair was dark like his father's, his eyes the same shade of gray that I saw when I looked in mirrors. He was running across the lawn toward the gates, toward me, his face alight with something I could not name. Behind him, walking more slowly, came a man I knew better than I knew myself. Edmund. He was dressed for dinner, his coat dark, his cravat perfectly tied. He moved with the same controlled grace I remembered, every gesture measured, every expression schooled. But there was something different about him now, a heaviness in his shoulders, a shadow behind his eyes. He looked older than 2 years should have made him. He looked like a man who had not slept well in a very long time. "Henry," he called, "come back. You know you are not to run near the gates." But Henry did not stop. He reached the iron bars and pressed his face between them, staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Papa," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper now. "Papa, look." Edmund reached the gate and took Henry's shoulder, drawing him back. He did not look at me, not directly. His gaze moved over me and past me, as though I were no more significant than a shadow. "Another beggar," he said to the gatekeeper. "Send her away." "But Papa," Henry said, and there was something in his voice now, something that trembled on the edge of recognition. "Papa, look at her. Look at her face." I stepped closer to the bars. The lamplight from the gatehouse fell across my features, and for the first time, Edmund truly saw me. I watched his face change. I watched the blood drain from his cheeks, watched his lips part, watched his eyes widen with something that might have been horror, or might have been hope, or might have been the shattering of a man who had believed himself safe from ghosts. "It cannot be," he breathed. "Edmund," I said, and my voice broke on his name. "Edmund, it is me. I did not die. I woke in a grave and I crawled out, and I have walked for months to return to you. Please, please let me in." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind keened across the moors. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime. And then Henry spoke, his small voice cutting through the silence like a bell. "Papa," he said, "Mama has crawled from her grave." Edmund's hand tightened on Henry's shoulder. His jaw clenched. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "This woman is not your mother," he said. "Your mother is dead. This is some imposter, some mad woman come to torment us with her delusions." He turned to the gatekeeper. "Remove her from the property. If she returns, summon the constable." "No," I cried. "Edmund, please, look at me. You know me. You know my face, my voice. I am your wife. I am Rosalind." But he was already turning away, pulling Henry with him, and the gatekeeper was reaching for me with rough hands. And the gates were closing, and I was screaming Edmund's name, screaming Henry's name, screaming until my voice gave out, and there was nothing left but the sound of my own ragged breathing in the cold autumn dark. They left me there. I do not know how long I lay on the ground outside the gates, long enough for the stars to emerge, long enough for the lamps in the house to go dark, one by one. Long enough for my tears to dry and my heart to harden into something that could survive what had just happened. He had not recognized me, or he had recognized me and refused to admit it. Either way, the result was the same. I was locked out of my own life, denied by the man who had sworn to love me until death parted us. Death had parted us, but I had returned, and he did not want me back. But Henry had known. Even after 2 years, even with a new woman calling herself his mother, even with every reason to forget, Henry had looked at my face and seen the truth. He had called me Mama. He had known. That knowledge was the only thing that kept me alive that night. I found shelter in an abandoned groundskeeper's cottage on the far edge of the estate, a place I remembered from my years as mistress of Ravenmoor. It was cold and damp and smelled of mildew, but it had a roof and walls and a door that still latched. I curled in a corner and let exhaustion take me, and I dreamed of my son's face pressed against the iron bars, his voice calling me by the name I thought I had lost forever. In the morning, I began to plan. I could not force my way into Ravenmoor. I had no proof of who I was, no documents, no allies. To the world, Rosalind Blackwood was dead, buried in the family plot with all the ceremony befitting a countess. If I presented myself to authorities, I would be dismissed as a madwoman at best, arrested as a fraud at worst. I needed evidence. I needed to understand what had happened to me, who had buried me alive, and why Edmund seemed so determined to pretend I did not exist. I needed answers, and there was only one place I could find them. The village of Ravenmoor lay 3 miles from the estate, a small collection of stone cottages and shops clustered around a church whose spire I could see from my hiding place. I had visited it often during my time as countess, bringing baskets to the poor, attending services on Sundays, presiding over festivals and fetes. The villagers had known me. Some of them surely would remember my face, but I could not go to them as I was, filthy and ragged and half-mad with desperation. I needed to make myself presentable enough to be believed, or at least presentable enough not to be driven away on sight. There was a stream near the cottage, and I used it to wash as best I could, scrubbing weeks of grime from my skin, combing tangles from my hair with my fingers. My gown was beyond saving, but I found an old cloak in the cottage, moth-eaten but serviceable, and I wrapped it around myself to hide the worst of my appearance. When I looked at my reflection in the stream, I saw a woman I barely recognized, gaunt, hollow-eyed, aged beyond her years. But beneath the damage, the bones of my face remained, the shape of my eyes, the curve of my lips, the small scar on my chin from a childhood fall. These things could not be erased. These things would testify to who I was. I walked to the village as the sun climbed toward noon, keeping to back paths and hedgerows to avoid the main road. The first person I approached was a woman I had once known well, the baker's wife, a kind soul who had always saved the best bread for the hall. She was sweeping the steps of her shop when I appeared, and she looked up with the automatic smile of someone greeting a customer before her face went pale and the broom clattered from her hands. "Saints preserve us," she whispered. "Mrs. Holloway," I said, "you know me." She backed away, crossing herself, her eyes never leaving my face. "You are dead," she said. "I saw them bury you. I was at the funeral." "You cannot be here." "I am not dead," I told her. "I was buried, but I was not dead. I woke in the ground and I clawed my way out. Please, Mrs. Holloway, I need help. I need someone to believe me." But she was already retreating into her shop, slamming the door, and through the window I could see her praying, her lips moving rapidly, her hands clasped tight. I tried others: the blacksmith who had shoed my horses, the vicar's wife who had taken tea with me every Thursday, the old woman who tended the church cemetery. Each of them reacted the same way: recognition, then terror, then denial. Some fled. Some threatened to summon the constable. One threw holy water at me and screamed for me to return to hell. By evening, I understood that I would find no allies in the village. The story of my death had taken root too deeply. To these people, I was not a woman wronged, but a specter, a revenant, something to be feared and driven away. If I continued to show my face, I would be captured and locked away somewhere far worse than the grave I had escaped. I returned to my cottage as darkness fell, despair settling over me like a second burial. I had no money, no friends, no proof of my identity. I had only my memories and my determination and the image of my son's face, recognizing me through iron bars. It was not enough. It would have to be enough. Over the following weeks, I became a ghost in truth, haunting the edges of my own former life. I watched Ravenmoor Hall from a distance, learning its rhythms, its routines. I saw the servants come and go, recognized some faces, noted others that were new. I saw Edmund ride out each morning, his posture rigid, his face set in lines of something that might have been grief or might have been guilt. I saw Henry playing on the lawn, supervised by a nursemaid I did not know, and my heart ached with a pain so fierce I thought it might kill me where I stood. And I saw her. Lady Marguerite. She was everything I was not: tall where I was small, dark where I was fair, commanding where I had been gentle. She moved through the house as though she owned it, because she did now, in every way that mattered. She gave orders to the servants. She presided over dinner. She sat in my chair at my table and smiled at my husband across candles that should have illuminated my face, not hers. I hated her with a purity that frightened me. But hatred alone would not give me back my life. I needed information, and there was one source I had not yet tried. The servants' entrance to Ravenmoor was in the back of the house, down a flight of stone steps that led to the kitchens. I remembered it from my years as mistress, remembered slipping down there sometimes to speak with the cook about menus or to bring medicine to a scullery maid who had taken ill. The servants had loved me then. Some of them might still. I waited until late one night, when the house was dark and most of the staff would be abed. I crept through the shadows to the servants' door and knocked, softly at first, then more firmly. The woman who answered was Mrs. Palmer, the housekeeper, a stout figure in a nightcap with a candle in her hand. She opened the door with the weary irritation of someone disturbed from sleep. And then she saw my face, and the candle trembled so violently that wax spattered on the floor. "Lady Blackwood," she breathed. "Mrs. Palmer," I said. "You remember me?" She stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. Then she reached out, grabbed my arm, and pulled me inside with a strength that surprised me. "Come," she said, quickly, before anyone sees. She led me through the silent kitchens, past the banked fires and the hanging pots, to a small room at the back where she kept her accounts and took her private meals. She closed the door and turned to face me, and in the candlelight I could see tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "It is you," she said. "I knew it. I knew they were wrong." "You believed me dead," I said. She shook her head. "I believed them when they told me, but I never believed it in my heart. There was something wrong about the way it happened, my lady. Something wrong about all of it." "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." And she did. She told me about the fever that had struck me down, sudden and violent, leaving me bedridden within hours of its onset. She told me about the doctor who had been summoned, a man named Julian Fairfax, sent by a colleague of Edmund's in London, a specialist in rare diseases. She told me how Fairfax had taken over my care, dismissing the local physician, administering medicines that no one else was allowed to touch. She told me about the night I died. "You were so still," she said. "So cold. Dr. Fairfax examined you and declared you gone. He said the fever had taken you, that there was nothing more to be done. The Earl, he was distraught. I have never seen a man so broken. He would not leave your side for hours. But Dr. Fairfax insisted that you be buried quickly, said something about the nature of the illness, about the risk of contagion. The Earl argued I know he did, but in the end he gave in. You were buried the next day. In the family plot, I said. Mrs. Palmer's face twisted. That is what everyone believes. That is what we were told. But my lady, I do not think it is true. What do you mean? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The night you were buried, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about you, about how young you were, about the little boy upstairs who would never see his mother again. I went to the window and I saw something strange. I saw Dr. Fairfax and two men I did not recognize loading something into a cart, something wrapped in cloth. They drove it away from the house, not toward the cemetery, but toward the moors. You think they moved my body? I think they never buried you in the family plot at all, she said. I think your coffin there is empty. I think they took you somewhere else, somewhere no one would think to look. And I think, she added, her voice trembling now, I think someone wanted you not just dead, but erased. Why? I asked. Why would anyone want that? Mrs. Palmer was silent for a long moment. Then she said, Lady Marguerite arrived 3 months after you were buried. She had been corresponding with the Earl for years. I learned later. They had known each other before he married you, some connection through their families. She came as a friend to offer comfort in his grief. Within 6 months, she was his wife. My blood ran cold. Edmund remarried so quickly. He was not himself, Mrs. Palmer said, and there was something defensive in her tone. He was drowning in grief. He could not care for Henry alone, he said. The boy needed a mother. Lady Marguerite was kind to him, kind to the child. It seemed, at the time, like a mercy. A mercy, I repeated, while I lay in an unmarked grave, clawing at the earth. Mrs. Palmer reached out and took my hands. My lady, I do not know what happened to you. I do not know if the Earl knew the truth or if he was deceived like the rest of us. But I know that you are here now, and I know that your son has not forgotten you. He asks about you constantly, drives Lady Marguerite to distraction with his questions. He keeps a miniature of you under his pillow, one he stole from the gallery before they could hide it. He is a good boy, my lady, a loyal boy, and he knows his own mother. Henry, I whispered, and his name was a prayer. I can help you, Mrs. Palmer said. I can bring you food, clothes, information, but you must be careful. Lady Marguerite has eyes everywhere. If she learns you are alive, if she knows you have returned, I fear what she might do. You think she was part of it, I said. The burial, the deception. I think, Mrs. Palmer said slowly, that Lady Marguerite has wanted to be Countess of Ravenmoor, since long before she met the Earl. I think she is a woman who gets what she wants by any means necessary, and I think Dr. Fairfax did not act alone. Where is he now? The doctor. Gone. Vanished the day after your funeral. No one has seen or heard from him since. I closed my eyes, letting the information settle into my bones. Someone had poisoned me or drugged me, made me appear dead when I was only sleeping. Someone had buried me in a shallow grave far from consecrated ground, expecting me to die there in the darkness. And someone had erased all evidence of the crime, installing a new wife in my place before my body was even cold. Lady Marguerite was the obvious suspect, but Edmund had let it happen. Edmund had remarried. Edmund had looked at me through the gates and called me an imposter. Did he know? Did he know what was done to me? Mrs. Palmer shook her head. I cannot say, my lady, but I can tell you this. The Earl has not been the same since you died. He does not laugh, he barely smiles. He walks the halls at night, and sometimes I hear him speaking your name. If he is guilty, then guilt has become his prison. And if he is innocent, then he has lost everything, and does not even know it. I stayed with Mrs. Palmer until nearly dawn, learning everything she could tell me about the last 2 years. The candle burned low between us, its flame guttering in drafts that crept through the old stone walls, and I listened with a hunger that bordered on desperation. Each detail was a piece of my missing life, a fragment of the world that had continued without me. I learned that Lady Marguerite had taken control of the household with ruthless efficiency, replacing servants loyal to me with those loyal to her. The cook, who had been with the family for 30 years, dismissed for insolence. The gardener, who had tended my roses, let go for neglecting his duties. One by one, the people who might have remembered me kindly had been removed, and in their place came strangers who knew nothing of the woman I had been. I learned that Henry had resisted her at every turn, that he refused to call her mother, that he clung to memories of me with a stubbornness that infuriated her. He asked about me constantly, Mrs. Palmer said, her voice thick with emotion. Where I was buried, whether I could see him from heaven, whether I had truly loved him or had left him by choice. Lady Marguerite had told him that I was gone and that he must forget me, that dwelling on the dead was unhealthy for a young boy. But Henry would not forget. He hid my portrait under his pillow. He visited my grave in the family plot, though he was forbidden to do so. He talked to me at night, Mrs. Palmer whispered. Conversations she overheard when she passed his door, and the love and pain in his small voice broke her heart every time. I learned that Edmund spent most of his time in his study, drinking, and that there were rumors he was haunted by his dead wife's ghost. The servant spoke of hearing him call my name in the night, of finding him standing at windows that overlooked nothing, of watching him trace his fingers over objects that had belonged to me. He was not the man he had been, Mrs. Palmer said. The life had gone out of him the day I was buried. He moved through the house like a sleepwalker, performing his duties without presence, speaking without warmth. Lady Marguerite ruled Ravenmoor in all but name, and Edmund seemed not to care. Perhaps he was haunted by me. Perhaps I would become that ghost in truth. I told Mrs. Palmer about the grave I had escaped, the shallow pit on the edge of the moors, and her face went pale in the candlelight. I knew it, she breathed. I knew something was wrong. The funeral happened so quickly, my lady. Dr. Fairfax insisted that you be buried within the day, said something about the nature of the illness, about contagion. But it was not just haste, it was secrecy. There were men I did not recognize, men who came in the night and spoke to no one. And the coffin they carried out, it was wrong, too light, too small. I saw it with my own eyes, and I thought I must be imagining things, but now I know I was not. You think they moved my body, I said. I think they never buried you in the family plot at all, she said. I think your coffin there is empty. I think they took you somewhere else, somewhere no one would think to look. And I think she added, her voice trembling now. "I think someone wanted you not just dead, but erased." "Why?" I asked. "Why would anyone want that?" Mrs. Palmer was silent for a long moment. The candle sputtered and nearly went out, and we both watched the flame stabilize before she spoke again. Then she said, "Lady Marguerite arrived 3 months after you were buried. She had been corresponding with the Earl for years, I learned later. They had known each other before he married you, some connection through their families. She came as a friend, to offer comfort in his grief. Within 6 months, she was his wife. My blood ran cold, a chill that started in my chest and spread outward until my very fingers felt numb. Edmund remarried. So quickly. He was not himself, Mrs. Palmer said, and there was something defensive in her tone, something that told me she had wrestled with this question many times before. He was drowning in grief. He could not care for Henry alone, he said. The boy needed a mother. Lady Marguerite was kind to him, kind to the child. It seemed at the time like a mercy. We all believed it was a mercy. A mercy, I repeated, and the word tasted like ash. While I lay in an unmarked grave, clawing at the earth. Before I left, Mrs. Palmer gave me clothes, food, and a key. "This opens the garden door," she said, "the one that leads into the conservatory. Lady Marguerite never uses it. If you need to enter the house, use this. But be careful, my lady. Be very, very careful." I took the key and slipped back into the darkness, my mind already forming a plan. Over the next several weeks, I gathered evidence. I returned to the place where I had been buried, guided by fragmented memories and the pull of something deeper than thought. The clearing was overgrown now. The mound of earth I had clawed through covered with dead leaves and new brambles. But when I dug, I found the remains of the coffin, the shattered wood, the torn lining. I found a button from my burial gown, a strand of my own hair caught in the splinters. I wrapped these things in cloth and hid them in my cottage. I searched the estate for records, for letters, for anything that might prove what had been done to me. Mrs. Palmer helped where she could, smuggling documents from Edmund's study when he was away. Most of them were useless, household accounts and legal papers, but one night she brought me something that made my heart stop. It was a letter, addressed to Edmund, written in a hand I did not recognize. The date was 3 weeks before my illness began. "My dear Lord Blackwood," it read, "I write to inform you that the matter we discussed has been arranged. Dr. Fairfax will arrive at Ravenmoor on the 15th of next month. He is a man of discretion and skill, and he assures me that the procedure will be painless and undetectable. By the time the leaves fall, you will be free to pursue the happiness you have so long been denied. Burn this letter after reading. Your servant in all things, M.M. Marguerite." I read the letter 3 times, 4 times, 5. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the paper. The procedure will be painless and undetectable. They had planned it. They had planned my murder, my burial, my erasure from the world. And Edmund had known. Edmund had known. The grief that tore through me was worse than the grave. I had loved him. I had borne his child, shared his bed, built a life around the promise of his devotion. And he had conspired with another woman to bury me alive. I wanted to confront him immediately, to burst into the house and throw the letter in his face and demand to know how he could have done this to me. But something held me back. The letter was damning, yes, but it was not conclusive. It spoke of a procedure, but did not name me. It implied Edmund's knowledge, but did not prove his consent. And there was something else, something in the wording that nagged at me. "You will be free to pursue the happiness you have so long been denied." Edmund had not been unhappy in our marriage, I would have known. We had loved each other, truly and deeply, or so I had believed. There had been no signs of discontent, no hints that he longed for another, unless I had been blind, unless I had seen only what I wanted to see, or unless the letter was not what it appeared to be. I needed more evidence. I needed to find Dr. Fairfax, to discover what had truly happened to me in those fevered days, to understand why I had not died when everyone expected me to. And I needed to see Edmund again, not through iron bars, but face to face, close enough to read the truth in his eyes. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mrs. Palmer brought word that Lady Marguerite would be traveling to London for a week, visiting her sister. Edmund would remain at Ravenmoor, as would Henry. The household would be diminished, the ladies' spies gone with their mistress. If I ever wanted to enter the house, now was the time. I waited until midnight. The garden door opened silently on its hinges, as though it had been waiting for me. I stepped into the conservatory and breathed in the scent of orange blossoms and damp earth, so achingly familiar that tears sprang to my eyes. I had spent countless hours here, tending my plants, reading in the dappled sunlight, teaching Henry the names of flowers. Now the plants had grown wild and untended, leaves pressing against the glass, vines creeping across the floor. Lady Marguerite had no love for growing things. I moved through the silent house like a wraith, past the drawing room where I had once held salons, past the music room where I had played piano for Edmund in the evenings, past the gallery where my portrait had once hung in a place of honor. The portrait was gone now, replaced by one of Lady Marguerite, her cold beauty rendered in oils, her eyes following me through the darkness. I climbed the stairs to the nursery. The house was quiet around me, settled into the deep stillness of the small hours when even servants slept. I knew these stairs by heart, had climbed them 1,000 times before, but now each step felt weighted with significance, as though I were ascending not just to the nursery, but to some moment of reckoning that had been waiting for me all along. The corridor was darker than I remembered, the portraits on the walls shrouded in shadow. I passed doors that led to rooms I had known intimately. The guest chamber, where my mother had stayed when Henry was born. The linen closet where I had once hidden during a party, giggling like a child while Edmund searched for me. All of it familiar, all of it strange, like a dream of a place rather than the place itself. The nursery door was ajar, and a thin line of light spilled into the corridor. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and there, sitting up in his bed with a candle guttering on the nightstand, was my son. He had grown so much. The chubby cheeks of babyhood had given way to the sharper planes of boyhood, and his dark hair curled around his ears in a way that reminded me painfully of Edmund. But his eyes were the same, those gray eyes that had looked up at me on the day of his birth with wonder and trust, and they looked at me now without surprise, without fear, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. "I knew you would come," he said. His voice was different too, deeper, more sure of itself. "I knew you were not really dead." I crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered him into my arms, holding him so tightly I feared I might hurt him. But he did not complain, only wrapped his small arms around my neck and pressed his face into my shoulder, and I felt his tears soaking through the fabric of my dress. He smelled of soap and childhood, of the lavender sachets Mrs. Palmer must have put in his clothes, and beneath it all, impossibly, the scent I remembered from when he was a baby, that indefinable essence that was simply Henry, simply my son, simply the person I loved most in all the world. "Mama," he whispered, "Mama, I missed you so much." "I missed you too," I said, and my voice was barely a sound, choked by tears I had not known I was holding back. Every day, every moment. You were all I thought about, all I fought for, my darling boy, my precious Henry. I held him for a long time, rocking him gently as I had when he was small, feeling the miracle of his heartbeat against my chest. This was what I had survived for. This was what had pulled me from the grave when my body wanted to surrender, what had driven me across miles of hostile country when my feet were bleeding and my mind was shattered. This child, this boy, this piece of my heart made flesh. He pulled back to look at me, his gray eyes searching my face with an intensity that seemed too old for his years. "You look different," he said. "Thinner, sadder." "I have been through a great deal," I told him, smoothing the tears from his cheeks with my thumbs. "But I am here now. I am here, and I am not leaving you again. Promise?" "I promise." He nodded solemnly, accepting my word as children do, with absolute faith. It humbled me, that faith. I had broken so many things in my life, had so many things broken for me, but this, at least, I could hold sacred. This promise I would keep. Then he said, "Lady Marguerite tells me you are dead. She says I must forget you and call her mother. But I never do. I never forget. I keep your picture under my pillow, the little one of you in the silver frame. And at night, when everyone is asleep, I talk to you. I tell you about my day. I ask you questions. Sometimes I think you answer, in my dreams." The words pierced me, sweet and sharp. I smoothed the hair from his forehead, marveling at how much he had grown, how much I had missed. "I always heard you," I said. "Even when I was far away, even when I could not come to you, I heard every word. And I am so proud of you, Henry, so proud of how brave you have been." He smiled, a small and tentative thing, but a smile nonetheless. It transformed his face, drove the shadows from his eyes, and for a moment I could see the man he would become. Strong, kind, loyal to those he loved. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Will you come back and live with us again, like before?" The question pierced me. I thought of the obstacles that lay ahead, the confrontations, the accusations, the possibility that I might fail. But looking into my son's eyes, I could not bring myself to speak of doubt. "I do not know yet," I admitted. "There are things I must discover first, truths I must uncover. But I swear to you, no matter what happens, I will never truly leave you. Do you believe me?" He nodded. "I believe you, Mama." We sat together for a long time, talking in whispers. He told me about his lessons, his pony, the tree he had learned to climb in the garden. He told me about Mrs. Palmer, who was kind to him, and the nursemaid, who was strict but fair. He told me about his father, who barely spoke anymore, who sat in his study night after night staring at nothing, who sometimes called Henry by my name and then looked away with tears in his eyes. "He still loves you," Henry said. "I know he does. He looks at your picture, the one he keeps locked in his desk. He thinks no one knows, but I saw him once. He was crying, Mama. I have never seen Papa cry before." The words settled into my heart like stones. Edmund had kept my picture. Edmund wept over my memory. Was it the grief of a husband who had lost his wife, or the guilt of a man who had helped to kill her? "I need to speak to him," I said. "But I am afraid, Henry. I am afraid of what I might learn." Henry took my hand with a solemnity beyond his years. "Whatever he tells you," he said, "remember that I love you. And whatever he has done, remember that he loved you too. I saw it every day before you got sick. He looked at you the way the sun looks at the moon, like you were the most beautiful thing in the whole world." I kissed his forehead, blinking back tears. "When did you become so wise?" I asked. "I have had a lot of time to think," he said, "and a lot of time to pray. I prayed every night for you to come back. And you did, Mama. My prayers worked. I held him until he fell asleep, his breathing evening out, his grip on my hand slowly relaxing. Then I laid him gently back on his pillow, tucked the blankets around him, and pressed one last kiss to his hair. "Sleep well, my darling," I whispered. "I will see you again soon." And then I went to find his father. Edmund's study was at the far end of the east wing, a room I had rarely entered during our marriage. It was his sanctuary, he had always said, a place where he could work undisturbed. I remembered standing at the threshold sometimes, watching him bent over his papers, and the tender pride I had felt at having a husband who took his responsibilities so seriously. Now, As I approached the door and saw light flickering beneath it, I understood that it had become something else, a prison of his own making, a tomb for the living. The corridor was cold. The gas lamps turned low for the night. My footsteps were silent on the thick carpet, and I moved like a wraith, like the ghost everyone believed me to be. My heart hammered in my chest so loudly I was certain he must hear it through the door. But there was no sound from within, only the occasional clink of glass against glass, the shuffle of papers, the heavy silence of a man alone with his thoughts. I did not knock. I simply opened the door and stepped inside. The room was smaller than I remembered, or perhaps it only seemed that way because of the clutter that filled it. Books and papers were stacked on every surface, the desk buried beneath correspondence and ledgers, the floor scattered with documents that had slipped from their piles. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting more shadow than light, and the air smelled of smoke and brandy and something else, something sour, the scent of neglect. He was sitting at his desk, with a glass of brandy in his hand, and my portrait in front of him, the small one that Henry had spoken of. The miniature had been painted on our first anniversary, a gift from Edmund that I had cherished for its tenderness. In it, I was smiling, my hair loose around my shoulders, my eyes bright with the happiness of a woman who believed her future was secure. Now he held it as though it were a relic, a sacred thing that might crumble to dust if handled too roughly. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment his expression did not change, as though he had been expecting me, as though my appearance was merely the continuation of a dream he had been having for 2 years. Then the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The brandy spread across the carpet in a dark stain, but neither of us moved to clean it. We simply stared at each other across the chaos of his room, across the wreckage of our lives, and I felt the gulf between us like a physical presence, a third person in the room. "Rosalind," he breathed. "Edmund," I said. He rose from his chair, swaying slightly, and I realized he was drunk, or nearly so. His cravat was loosened, his shirt untucked, his hair disheveled in a way I had never seen it. The Edmund I had married was fastidious about his appearance, would never have allowed himself to be seen in such a state. But this was not that man. This was someone else. Someone hollowed out by grief or guilt or whatever had been eating at him since the day they put me in the ground. "You are here," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "You are really here." "I am here," I confirmed. "And I would very much like to know why you tried to have me killed." The words hit him like a blow. He staggered back against the desk, gripping the edge for support, and the look on his face was one of such genuine anguish that I felt my certainty waver. His eyes, those dark eyes I had loved so well, were red-rimmed and wet, and his hands shook as though palsied. "Killed?" he repeated. "Rosalind, I do not understand. You were ill. You died. I buried you in the family plot, and I have mourned you every day since. Why would you say such a thing?" "I showed you the letter," I said, though the letter was still hidden in my cottage. "I know about Dr. Fairfax. I know about the procedure. I know about Marguerite." His face went white, so white that for a moment I thought he might faint. He reached behind him, steadying himself against the chair, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "The letter," he said. "You found the letter." So it was true. So he did know. The confirmation was a knife in my chest, but I held myself steady, refused to let him see how deeply he had cut me. "How could you?" I asked, and now my voice was breaking, the anger giving way to something rawer, something that had been building since the moment I woke in darkness. "How could you do this to me? I loved you, Edmund. I trusted you, and you buried me alive." "No." His voice was sharp now, desperate. "No, Rosalind, you do not understand. I did not bury you alive. I did not know. I did not know any of it." He crossed the room and took my hands, and his grip was so tight it was almost painful. Listen to me, he pleaded. Please, just listen. The letter you found, it was not about you. It was about Marguerite's husband. Her husband? She was married before, he said, to a man named Arthur Sinclair, a cruel man, a violent man. He beat her, Rosalind. He locked her in rooms for days without food. She came to me for help years ago, when we were both young, and I made inquiries, found doctors who could help her. The procedure the letter mentions was not a murder. It was a sleeping draft, something to incapacitate Sinclair long enough for Marguerite to escape. It worked. She fled to the continent and did not return until after he died of natural causes 3 years later. I stared at him, trying to reconcile his words with what I knew. But the letter, I said. It spoke of freedom. It said you would be free to pursue happiness. Because I had told her I was unhappy, he said, and his voice cracked. Not in my marriage to you, never that. I was unhappy because my brother had cheated me out of my inheritance and left me drowning in debt. I was unhappy because I feared I would lose Ravenmoor and have nothing to leave to our son. Marguerite helped me. She had money, connections. She promised that when her husband died, she would help me restore my family's fortune. The happiness she spoke of was financial security, nothing more. Then why, I asked, did you not recognize me at the gates? Why did you call me an imposter? Because I thought I was losing my mind. He released my hands and turned away, running his fingers through his hair. I have seen you everywhere since you died, Rosalind. In the garden, in the corridors, in my dreams. I have heard your voice in empty rooms, felt your presence beside me in bed. I thought you were another hallucination, another torment sent to punish me for failing to save you. And when Henry said what he said, when he called you his mother, I panicked. I could not let him believe that the dead could return. I could not let him hope for something impossible. I am not impossible, I said. I am standing right here. He turned back to me, and there were tears on his face now, tears he made no effort to hide. I see that, he said, and I do not understand. The doctor said you were dead. He checked for breath, for heartbeat. He said there was no mistake. We buried you in the family plot with full rights. I placed flowers on your grave every Sunday. How can you be here? Because I was not buried in the family plot, I said. I was buried in a shallow grave on the edge of the moors, in a cheap wooden box, with no marker and no mourners. Someone moved my body, Edmund. Someone wanted me to disappear. He stared at me, and I watched the horror dawn in his eyes. Dr. Fairfax, he whispered. Dr. Fairfax, I agreed. Who came from London at your request, who took over my care, who declared me dead and insisted on a hasty burial, who vanished the day after my funeral and has not been seen since. I did not know, Edmund said, and his voice was barely audible. Rosalind, I swear to you, I did not know. I trusted him. Marguerite recommended him, said he was the best physician she knew. When you fell ill, I was desperate. I would have done anything to save you, and yet I was buried alive. He flinched as though I had struck him. If what you say is true, if Fairfax did this, then I will find him. I will hunt him to the ends of the earth and make him answer for his crimes. But you must believe me, Rosalind. I never wanted you dead. Losing you nearly destroyed me. I have not been whole since. I wanted to believe him. Looking into his eyes, seeing the anguish there, I wanted desperately to believe that he had been deceived, that his only crime was trust in the wrong people. But the questions remained, sharp as knives. Then why did you marry Marguerite? I asked. 3 months after my death, while my grave was still fresh. Why would you take another wife so quickly if you loved me as you claim? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with shame. Because she told me it was what you would have wanted. She said that Henry needed a mother, that the household needed a mistress, that I was falling apart and someone had to hold things together. She was there. Rosalind. She was there every day, managing, comforting, making herself indispensable. And I was too broken to see what she was doing. What was she doing? He hesitated. Then he said, "Taking your place, not just in the house, but in Henry's life, in mine. She has been trying to erase you, Rosalind, systematically and completely. Your portrait removed from the gallery, your clothes given away, your garden left to run wild. Even your name is not spoken in this house anymore. She calls you the late Lady Blackwood, as though you were some distant ancestor and not my wife of 7 years. And you allowed it? I did not see it." His voice was bitter now, self-loathing. I was buried in my own grief. I drank. I hid in this room. I let her take control because I could not bear to face what I had lost. And by the time I realized what was happening, it seemed too late to stop it. "It is not too late," I said. "I am here. I am alive. And I am going to reclaim everything that was taken from me." He looked at me then with something that might have been hope. "What can I do?" he asked. "Tell me how to help you, and I will do it. Whatever penance you require, whatever proof you need of my innocence, I will provide it." I considered him for a long moment, this man I had loved, this man I was not sure I could trust. Then I said, "Help me find Dr. Fairfax. Help me discover the truth about what he did and who paid him to do it. And help me protect our son from whatever comes next." "Our son," Edmund repeated, and his voice caught. "He called you Mama. He recognized you when I could not. He has more faith than I deserve. He has your stubbornness," I said, "and my eyes. He is the best of both of us." Edmund crossed the room and stood before me, close enough to touch, but not touching. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering near my cheek. I nodded, and he cupped my face in his palm, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was gentle, reverent, the touch of a man handling something precious and fragile. "I thought I would never see you again," he said. "I thought I would live the rest of my life in this twilight, half present, half dead myself. And now you are here, and I do not know what to do. We find the truth," I said, "and then we decide." He nodded. "Together? Together." It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution, but it was a beginning. The days that followed were a blur of investigation and discovery. Edmund threw himself into the search for Dr. Fairfax with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He wrote letters to every hospital in London, every medical society, every colleague who might have crossed paths with the vanished physician. He hired investigators, offered rewards, chased rumors that led nowhere. And through it all, he kept me hidden in the house, in a suite of rooms in the unused West Wing that Marguerite never visited. Mrs. Palmer brought me news of the household. Lady Marguerite was due to return from London in 5 days. The staff was preparing for her arrival, airing out her rooms, stocking her favorite foods. I would need to be gone before then, or ready to confront her. I chose confrontation. But before that confrontation could come, we made a discovery that changed everything. One of Edmund's investigators had traced Dr. Fairfax to a small village in Cornwall where he had been living under a false name for the past 2 years. He was dying, the investigator reported, consumed by a wasting disease that had left him bedridden and delirious. But he had moments of lucidity, and in those moments he spoke of terrible things, of experiments, of potions that simulated death, of women buried alive at the behest of jealous rivals. Edmund and I traveled to Cornwall together, leaving Henry in Mrs. Palmer's care. The journey took 3 days, and during that time we barely spoke, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. But at night, in the inns where we stopped, Edmund would sit by my door like a guardian, and I would hear him pacing until dawn. We found Dr. Fairfax in a cottage at the edge of a fishing village, attended by a single nurse who seemed relieved to have visitors. He was barely recognizable as the man I remembered. his flesh wasted, his eyes sunken, his breath rattling in his chest. But when he saw my face, those sunken eyes widened. "You," he breathed. "You came back." "I came back," I said, "and I want to know why." He laughed, a terrible sound like bones scraping together. "Because I failed," he said. "The compound I gave you was supposed to stop your heart for 6 hours. Long enough for burial, long enough for the grave to do its work. But you were stronger than I expected. You fought the drug. You did not die as you were supposed to." "Who hired you?" Edmund demanded. The doctor's gaze shifted to him, and there was something like pity in his expression. "You do not know?" he asked. "You truly do not know?" "Tell me," Edmund said. Dr. Fairfax coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Your beloved Marguerite," he said. "She came to me 2 months before the Countess fell ill. She said there was a woman standing between her and everything she wanted. She offered me more money than I had seen in a lifetime. All I had to do was make one woman disappear." Edmund staggered as though struck. "No," he said. "She told me she was helping. She recommended you because she wanted Rosalind to recover." "She recommended me because I had done this before," Fairfax said. "For her. Her husband, the one she claimed was cruel. He was not cruel at all. He was kind, generous, trusting, and she buried him alive, just as she buried your wife. I helped her do it. God forgive me, I helped her." I felt the room spin around me. Marguerite's husband. The man she had claimed was abusive, the reason she needed to escape. He had been innocent, just as I had been innocent, and she had killed him to take his fortune, just as she had tried to kill me to take Edmund. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" Edmund asked, his voice hoarse. "Doctor," Fairfax gestured weakly toward a chest in the corner of the room. "My papers," he said, "my records. I kept everything. Letters from Lady Marguerite, instructions, payments. I knew she would try to silence me someday, so I kept proof. Use it. Expose her. It is the only atonement I can offer now." Edmund opened the chest and began to sift through the contents. I watched his face as he read letter after letter, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his hands begin to shake. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were filled with a devastation so profound I could not bear to witness it. "I brought her into our home," he said. "I married her. I let her raise our son, and all along she was the one who took you from me." "You did not know," I said. "You could not have known. I should have seen it." His voice broke. "I should have protected you." "You can protect me now," I said. "Take those papers, return to Ravenmoor, and help me bring her to justice." We returned to Ravenmoor the day before Marguerite was due to arrive. Edmund called for the constable, presented the evidence, swore out a warrant for her arrest. Mrs. Palmer gathered the servants and told them the truth, that their mistress was alive, that Lady Marguerite was a murderer, that the household was about to be torn apart. The reactions varied. Some of the servants wept with joy. Others stared at me with suspicion, unable to reconcile the ragged woman before them with the Countess they remembered. But all of them agreed on one thing: Henry must be protected. I went to my son and told him everything, in terms he could understand. I told him that Lady Marguerite had done a very bad thing, that she had hurt me and tried to keep me away from him, but that I was safe now and she could never hurt us again. He listened with solemn attention, and when I finished, he threw his arms around me and held on tight. "I never liked her," he said. She smiled too much, but her eyes were always cold. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Out of the mouths of those who see what adults choose to ignore. Marguerite arrived the following afternoon, her carriage rolling up the drive with all the ceremony of a queen returning to her kingdom. She swept into the house calling for tea, calling for her maid, calling for Henry, and she did not see me standing in the shadows of the entrance hall until it was too late. "Hello, Marguerite," I said. She stopped dead. The color drained from her face, and for just a moment I saw something crack behind her eyes, some carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. Then she recovered, drawing herself up, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Rosalind," she said, "what a remarkable recovery. We all thought you were dead." "You thought I would be dead," I corrected. "You paid Dr. Fairfax to ensure it. But I am more resilient than you anticipated." "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but her voice was too steady, too controlled. "The fever clearly affected your mind. Perhaps a stay in a sanatorium would help." Edmund stepped out from the drawing room, the constable beside him. "The evidence is overwhelming, Marguerite," he said. "Fairfax kept everything. Every letter, every payment, every instruction. You will not talk your way out of this." For a long moment, Marguerite did not move. Then she laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You think I did this for you?" she asked, looking at Edmund with contempt. "You were a means to an end, nothing more. A title, an estate, a place in society. She was standing in my way and I removed her. It is what women like me have always had to do to survive." "You buried me alive," I said. "You buried your husband alive. You are a murderer." "I am a survivor," she spat, "and I would do it again." The constable stepped forward and took her arm. "Lady Marguerite Sinclair," he said, "I am arresting you for conspiracy to commit murder. You will come with me." She did not struggle. She did not weep or plead or protest. She simply looked at me with those cold eyes and smiled. "You may have won this battle, Rosalind," she said, "but you will never have what you had before. You will always know that your husband married me, that your son called me mother, that I slept in your bed and wore your jewels and ruled your house. I may hang for what I have done, but I will hang knowing that I took 2 years of your life that you will never get back." Then they led her away, and she was gone. The days that followed were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. The scandal was immense. The story spread through society like wildfire. The countess who rose from her grave, the murderess who had deceived them all, the earl who had unknowingly married a monster. Some pitied me. Others whispered that I must have been complicit somehow, that no woman could survive burial alive without some dark art. The invitations dried up. The visitors stopped coming. We were pariahs, all of us, exiled from the world we had once belonged to. But we had each other, and that was enough. Edmund and I rebuilt our marriage slowly, carefully, like architects reconstructing a building that had been bombed. There was no rushing back to what we had been. Too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. But there were moments of grace, a touch that lingered, a look that spoke volumes, a night spent talking until dawn about everything we had lost and everything we hoped to find. He was patient with me, as I learned to be patient with him. We grieved together for the years we had lost, for the innocence we could never reclaim. And in that shared grief, we found something new, something tempered by fire, something that felt like it might last. Henry was our salvation. He had waited for me, believed in me, held onto my memory when everyone else had let it fade. Now he clung to me with a ferocity that both broke and healed my heart. I could not give him back the mother he had lost, the woman who had been whole and unbroken, but I could give him the mother I was now, scarred, wary, but fiercely devoted. We never spoke of Lady Marguerite in front of him. He did not need to know the details of what she had done. He only needed to know that she was gone and would never return. She was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. I did not attend the execution. I had no desire to watch her die. I only wanted her erased from my life as thoroughly as she had tried to erase me, but even in death, she left her mark. The nightmares came every night. Dreams of darkness, of suffocation, of clawing at wood that would not break. I would wake screaming, drenched in sweat, and Edmund would hold me until the shaking stopped. Some wounds, I learned, do not heal. They only scar over, and we learn to live around them. I planted a garden in the spot where I had been buried, I dug out the remains of the coffin, burned them, and scattered flowers in their place. It was not a grave, but a rebirth, a place where beauty could grow from horror. I visited it often, Henry sometimes beside me, and we would sit among the blooms and talk about everything and nothing. He asked me once if I was angry at his father. I considered the question carefully. I was, I admitted. For a long time, I was furious with him. He married her. Henry. He let her into our home, our lives. Even if he did not know what she had done, he still chose her. But you forgave him? I am learning to, I said. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is something you choose over and over every day. And I choose to forgive him because I love him and because I believe he loves me. Does that make sense? Henry nodded. I think so, he said. He paused, then added, I am glad you came back, Mama, even if it was hard, even if it hurt. I am glad you did not stay in the ground. I gathered him into my arms. So am I, my darling. So am I. The seasons turned. Autumn gave way to winter, winter to spring. The scandal faded, as all scandals do, replaced by newer outrages, fresher gossip. Society began, tentatively, to welcome us back. Invitations arrived. Visitors called. The world continued to spin, indifferent to the suffering of those who inhabited it. I found that I no longer cared. The approval of society, the glittering balls and whispered intrigues, the constant performance of propriety, none of it mattered to me anymore. I had died and been reborn, and in that transformation I had lost my taste for artifice. I wanted only what was real. My son's laughter, my husband's touch, the feel of earth beneath my hands as I tended my garden. There were days when the weight of what I had endured seemed unbearable. Days when I would wake in the night, gasping for air, certain that I was back in the coffin, back in the darkness, back in the grave. On those nights, Edmund would hold me, his arms steady around me, his voice murmuring reassurances until the terror passed. He never complained, never grew impatient, never made me feel that my suffering was a burden. He understood that some wounds do not heal with time. They only become part of us, scars we carry into whatever future remains. I had forgiven him. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment of absolution, but gradually, inch by inch, as I watched him try to become the man he should have been. He stopped drinking, or nearly so. He emerged from his study, took interest in the running of the estate, spent hours with Henry that he had neglected before. He listened when I spoke, truly listened, as though my words were precious things he did not want to miss. And when I cried, when the memories overwhelmed me and I could not speak, he simply sat beside me and held my hand, a silent witness to grief he could not fix, but would not abandon. Edmund understood. He had been changed by the ordeal too, stripped of his illusions, forced to confront the consequences of his blindness. He was gentler now, more present. He spent hours with Henry, teaching him to ride, to fish, to read maps and chart stars. He spent hours with me, talking, listening, simply being together in the comfortable silence of those who have weathered storms. One afternoon, as we walked through the garden together, he stopped beside my roses and turned to face me. There was something in his eyes I had not seen in a long time, something that looked almost like hope. I want to renew our vows, he said, not because the first ones were invalid, but because we are different people now. Because I want to stand before God and our Son and promise to love you not as the man I was, but as the man I am trying to become. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had failed me and saved me, who had been deceived and had deceived himself, who had lost me through carelessness and found me through grace. The anger I had carried for so long, the hurt that had been my constant companion, I felt it loosening its grip, making room for something softer. Yes, I said, I would like that. We were married again in the little chapel at Ravenmoor, with Henry as our witness and Mrs. Palmer weeping in the pews. It was a quiet ceremony, no guests, no fanfare, just the three of us and the vicar and the vows we had made once before and were making again, this time with full knowledge of what they meant. We did not pretend that our marriage was what it had been. It was something different, something harder and more honest. We argued sometimes, old wounds reopening unexpectedly, old resentments surfacing like bodies in a lake. But we always found our way back to each other, drawn by the gravity of shared history, shared loss, shared hope. I never forgot those 2 years in the wilderness, the hunger, the cold, the loneliness, the villages that turned me away, the strangers who crossed themselves at my approach. I had been a ghost before I was a countess again, and some part of me would always belong to that phantom existence. But I had returned. Against all odds, against all expectation, I had clawed my way out of the darkness and reclaimed my life. Not the life I had been promised, perhaps. Not the fairy tale I had once believed in, but a life nonetheless, imperfect and precious and entirely my own. One evening, as autumn painted the moors in shades of gold and rust, I stood at the window of my bedroom and watched the sun set over Ravenmoor. The sky was ablaze with color, crimson and orange and gold, as though the heavens themselves were burning. It was beautiful, achingly so, and I felt tears prick my eyes, though whether from joy or sorrow I could not say. Edmund came to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. His fingers were warm, steady, real. After everything, after all the darkness, he was still here, and so was I. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" he asked. "The day after our wedding. You said the view made you feel like you could see forever." "I remember," I said. The memory came back to me in fragments, the weight of my wedding ring, still unfamiliar on my finger, the scent of roses from the garden below, the way Edmund had looked at me, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. I thought I knew what forever meant. And now? Now I know that forever is not a promise, I said, turning to meet his eyes. It is a choice, one we make every day for as long as we are able. He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. "Then I choose you," he said, "today and every day, for as long as I am able." I turned to look at him, this man I had loved and lost and found again. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the shadows that would never quite leave him. He was not the man I had married, but neither was I the woman who had stood beside him at the altar, young and hopeful and blissfully unaware of what was to come. We were different now. We were survivors, and that, in the end, was enough. From the garden below, I heard Henry's voice calling for us to come down. He had found a bird's nest in the hedgerow and wanted to show us the eggs. His excitement was infectious, his joy uncomplicated by the darkness that haunted his parents. "Coming," I called back, and Edmund and I walked out together into the fading light. The house rose behind us, ancient and enduring, its stones soaked in secrets and sorrows, but also in love, also in hope, also in the stubborn refusal of the living to stay buried. I had crawled from my grave on a night when the moon hung low and indifferent. I had walked through fire and shadow to reclaim what was mine, and though the scars remained, though the nightmares would never fully fade, I had found my way home, not to the home I had left, to something new, something built from the wreckage of the old, stronger for having been broken. My name is Rosalind Blackwood. I was the Countess of Ravenmoor, wife to Edmund, mother to Henry. I was buried alive by a woman who wanted my life, and I survived. This is my story. And it ends not with a grave, but with a garden. Not with death, but with the quiet, persistent miracle of life continuing. The wind carried Henry's laughter up to us, and I smiled. Some burials are merely beginnings, I had said once. In the darkness of a coffin I should never have escaped. And it was true. I had been buried, and I had risen. I had been erased, and I had returned. I had been given up for dead, and I had proven them all wrong. The dead do not return, they say. But I did, and I am still here, watching the sunset over the moors, listening to my son's laughter, holding my husband's hand, living at last the life that was meant to be mine all along.